Sometimes destiny does not knock on your door. Sometimes it accidentally sends you a text message. The enormous doors of the royal council chamber echoed shut with a thunderous finality as silence swallowed every corner of the ancient hall. Rain streamed down towering stained glass windows, turning the moonlight into pale ribbons across the polished black marble floor. Olivia Carter stood motionless in the center of the chamber, her fingers wrapped tightly around the phone that had unknowingly changed her life. Only a few feet away stood Lucian Ashcroft, the man she had spent 3 months teasing, arguing with, laughing with, and quietly trusting more than anyone else. Except he was not the overworked office employee she believed him to be. He was the Vampire King. His pale face, even whiter beneath the cold moonlight, revealed something she had never imagined seeing in him before. Fear. Not fear for himself. Fear that he had already lost the only honest relationship he had built in centuries. Around them, elegantly dressed members of the royal council remained perfectly still, their expressions guarded as they watched the impossible unfold. None of them spoke. None of them dared interrupt. Olivia's voice finally broke the silence. "You knew exactly who I was this entire time." Lucian held her gaze without looking away. "Yes. And you still let me believe you were just another guy who hated meetings." His answer came quietly. "Because that was the only version of myself you ever needed." She looked down at the phone in her hand, its screen still glowing with the conversation that had become part of her everyday life. Thousands of messages. Hundreds of jokes. Late-night conversations that had helped her survive exhausting shifts, overdue bills, and lonely evenings. Every memory suddenly carried a question she had never needed to ask before. Was any of it real? Outside, another flash of lightning illuminated the towering palace windows before disappearing into the storm. Lucian took one careful step forward. Not enough to invade her space. Just enough to show he was no longer hiding behind silence. "Every word I sent you was real." Olivia swallowed hard. "Except your name." His shoulders lowered almost imperceptibly. "Yes. Except your job." "Yes. Except your entire life." He closed his eyes for the briefest moment before answering. "Yes." The honesty should have made everything easier. Somehow it only made her heart feel heavier. She laughed once, though there was no amusement behind it. "Do you know what is funny?" Lucian waited. "I spent 3 months making fun of you because I thought you were just some stressed-out corporate guy who could not survive a meeting without complaining." For the first time since she entered the chamber, the faintest smile crossed his face. "You were not entirely wrong." Several council members exchanged confused glances, unable to understand how their immortal king could still smile at such a moment. Olivia shook her head. "I thought I knew you." "You do," Lucian answered softly. "You know the only version of me that has ever mattered." The storm continued beyond the palace walls while neither of them noticed the council fading into the background. In that single moment there was no throne, no ancient kingdom, no centuries of tradition. There were only two people standing on opposite sides of one devastating truth. Then the world seemed to stop as Olivia slowly lifted her eyes to meet his again, and everything that had brought them to this impossible place began exactly 3 months earlier with one simple text sent to the wrong number. 3 months earlier the rain had been falling just as steadily, but neither of them knew that one ordinary mistake was quietly rearranging the course of 2 completely different lives. Olivia Carter rubbed her tired eyes as the microwave announced the end of another late-night dinner, with a single cheerful beep. A small bowl of instant macaroni and cheese was hardly a celebration after working 2 jobs, but it was inexpensive, warm, and enough to get her through another evening. Her tiny apartment overlooked an alley instead of the skyline. The old radiator rattled every few minutes, and a stack of unpaid bills rested beside the kitchen counter like unwanted decorations. Across the room her younger brother Ethan had already fallen asleep. Over a community college textbook after another exhausting day balancing classes and a part-time job. Olivia smiled softly, covered him with a blanket, and quietly reached for her phone just as it vibrated across the table. "I think I ruined everything." She frowned at the unfamiliar number. Wrong person, she thought immediately. Probably another late-night scam, or someone who had typed 1 digit incorrectly. Most people would have ignored it. Olivia never seemed capable of leaving even the smallest mystery unanswered. She typed back, "Congratulations. You have successfully texted the wrong number. Several seconds passed before another message appeared. I am beginning to realize that. She laughed to herself. At least the stranger had a sense of humor. Then you should probably stop texting random people before you accidentally confess your life story. Another pause. Then came the reply that made her shake her head. Too late. She leaned back against the old sofa, balancing the warm bowl on one knee while smiling despite herself. Well then, mysterious stranger, allow me to offer free advice. Drink some water. Get some sleep. Tomorrow will probably look less dramatic. On the opposite side of the city, hidden far above Manhattan behind layers of modern architecture and centuries of carefully protected secrets, Lucian Ashcroft stood alone inside a private study larger than Olivia's entire apartment building. Crystal glasses reflected the dim light of antique chandeliers while rain traced slow paths across enormous windows overlooking the city below. The annual memorial honoring the queen he had lost centuries ago had ended only an hour earlier. Advisors had spoken carefully. Nobles had bowed respectfully. Musicians had played the same melodies every year without fail. Yet when the ceremony ended, the silence always returned heavier than before. During that silence, one unnecessary glass of whiskey had become two. Two had quietly become three. Somewhere between old memories and an exhausted attempt to text his chief advisor, one incorrect digit had carried his message into the life of a woman who had absolutely no reason to care who he was. His phone buzzed again. Olivia had written, also, if you wake up tomorrow regretting tonight, blame your bad decisions instead of your phone. Lucian stared at the message before something unfamiliar softened his expression. He could not remember the last time anyone had spoken to him without ceremony, fear, or carefully rehearsed respect. He answered with complete honesty. That might be the most reasonable thing anyone has told me all week. Olivia smiled while taking another bite of dinner. That is honestly a little concerning. What kind of people are you hanging around? Lucian glanced around the magnificent room filled with portraits of rulers who had shaped centuries of history. His answer was simple. People who almost never tell me the truth. Olivia laughed out loud, careful not to wake Ethan. Then you definitely need better friends. Neither of them realized that the conversation should have ended right there. Instead, one more message appeared. Thank you for answering. Olivia looked at the screen for a long second before replying with the same casual honesty that had guided every choice she made. Do not thank me yet. I reserve the right to make fun of you again tomorrow. For the first time in longer than anyone inside the palace could remember, Lucian Ashcroft smiled without pretending, and somewhere beyond the rain-soaked skyline, destiny quietly decided that one wrong number had somehow become exactly the right one. The next morning Olivia woke before sunrise to the familiar sound of her alarm vibrating across the nightstand. For one brief second she wondered if the strange conversation from the night before had been nothing more than a dream brought on by exhaustion. Then her phone lit up with a new message. Good morning. I survived your advice. She smiled before she could stop herself. Impressive. Hydration really is a miracle. She slipped the phone into her jacket pocket, packed a simple lunch, and quietly left the apartment after making sure Ethan had enough money for the bus. Outside, Manhattan was already waking up. Delivery trucks rumbled down narrow streets. Coffee shops filled with commuters. The sidewalks became rivers of hurried footsteps. Olivia blended into the crowd like everyone else, another ordinary young woman trying to stretch every dollar and every minute. By 8 o'clock she was answering customer service calls from people frustrated about delayed deliveries, damaged packages, and forgotten passwords. She apologized with patience she did not always feel, solved problems she had not created, and somehow managed to remain kind even when others were not. During her lunch break she sat alone on a bench beside a small public plaza, unwrapped a homemade turkey sandwich, and finally looked at her phone again. Another message was waiting. How is your day going? She answered without thinking. I have apologized to 37 strangers before noon. I deserve a trophy. A few seconds later the reply arrived. You deserve a vacation. Olivia laughed quietly. Unless vacations suddenly become free, I will settle for coffee. Hundreds of feet above the city, inside the executive headquarters hidden within Ashcroft Tower, Lucian Ashcroft stood at the head of a conference table, while senior advisors presented reports that seemed almost identical to those from the week before. Trade agreements. financial forecasts, security updates. Every face in the room watched him carefully, waiting for instructions from the king they respected but never truly knew. Lord Sebastian noticed something unusual. Lucian glanced toward his phone resting beside a leather folder just as it vibrated softly. It happened so quickly that no human would have noticed. Every vampire in the room did. The king almost smiled. The meeting continued for another 20 minutes before Lucian calmly dismissed everyone. The heavy doors closed. Silence returned. Only then did he unlock his phone. Olivia had sent another message. My supervisor just told everyone to smile more, because customers can hear positive energy through the phone. Lucian answered immediately. Did it work? She replied. I smiled exactly once. It scared everyone nearby. A quiet laugh escaped him, genuine and effortless. Theodore, the palace steward, happened to enter with a tray of tea at that exact moment. He stopped in surprise. Your Majesty, was that laughter? Lucian looked up with mild embarrassment before setting the phone aside. Apparently, Theodore smiled kindly without asking another question. He had served the royal family for more than 3 centuries. He understood that some miracles did not need explanations. Across the city, Olivia finished her sandwich and stood to return to work. Before putting the phone away, she typed one last message. You still have not told me what you do for a living. Lucian looked at the question for several thoughtful seconds. The truth would end everything before it had truly begun. A lie would betray the honesty he had unexpectedly begun to value. Finally, he chose the smallest answer that was still real. I spend most days leading meetings, solving disputes, and making difficult decisions that affect many people. Olivia read the message while waiting for the crosswalk signal to change. She smiled to herself and typed back. So you are basically the world's most overworked manager. He looked at the screen, shook his head with quiet amusement, and replied with complete sincerity. That may be the most accurate description anyone has ever given me. The messages continued the next evening, then the evening after that, and before either of them realized it, replying had quietly become a habit neither wanted to break. Olivia finished her first job just before sunset, picked up a cup of discounted coffee, and hurried across town to begin her evening shift at the neighborhood cafe. She joked that caffeine was no longer a beverage but a survival strategy. Her coworkers laughed because they knew she was probably right. Between taking orders, wiping tables, and carrying warm pastries to customers, her phone remained tucked safely inside her apron pocket. She never checked it while working, but somehow she always knew when it vibrated. During her 15-minute break, she finally unlocked the screen. One unread message waited exactly where she expected it. I survived another day of meetings. Barely. She smiled and answered immediately. I told you yesterday that meetings were dangerous. You should start wearing emotional safety equipment. Lucian read the message while standing alone inside a magnificent private library, hidden beyond the executive offices of Ashcroft Tower. Ancient books lined towering shelves beside modern glass walls overlooking Manhattan. The contrast reflected his entire existence, one foot in the present, the other carrying centuries of history. He answered with unusual speed. Do you have any recommendations? Olivia replied. Yes. Coffee. Sarcasm. Low expectations. They have never failed me. A quiet laugh escaped him again. Theodore happened to pass the open doorway and noticed the king looking considerably younger than he had only a week earlier. The elderly steward did not interrupt. Instead, he simply smiled to himself and continued down the hallway. Some changes needed no announcement. Later that evening, Olivia finally clocked out and began the familiar walk toward the subway. The city buzzed around her with flashing traffic lights, food trucks, musicians performing on busy corners, and tired office workers heading home after another long day. She looked up at the glowing skyscrapers and typed another message while waiting for the pedestrian signal. Serious question. Lucian looked down at his phone. I am listening. She wrote. If you complain this much about work, why do you not quit? He stared at the question longer than expected. If only it were that simple. Instead of saying what he truly meant, he answered carefully. Some responsibilities cannot be handed to someone else. Olivia considered that reply while watching buses roll past in the rain. Then she smiled and typed back. That means you care. People who complain the most usually care the most. Otherwise they would have already walked away. Lucian lowered the phone slightly. 7 centuries of advisors had praised his wisdom. Generals had respected his decisions. Entire kingdoms had sworn loyalty to him. Yet somehow one ordinary woman understood the burden of leadership with a single sentence written while standing at a crosswalk. Before he could answer, another message appeared. Besides, somebody has to keep those meetings from becoming even worse. He laughed again, this time loud enough for Lord Sebastian to hear as he entered carrying a stack of official documents. The advisor stopped in the doorway, genuinely surprised. "Your Majesty, I was beginning to wonder whether the palace had forgotten the sound of laughter." Lucian accepted the documents with composed dignity, but the faint smile remained. "Perhaps it simply needed someone willing to tell me the truth." Lord Sebastian noticed the phone resting beside the papers but wisely chose not to ask questions. Across the city, Olivia finally reached her apartment, quietly unlocked the door, and found Ethan studying at the kitchen table. He looked up with a grin. "You seem happier lately." Olivia paused before answering. "Doi." Ethan nodded. "You smile at your phone a lot." She looked down at the screen where another message had just arrived. "Thank you for making today easier than yesterday." Olivia smiled without even realizing it and typed back. "Do not get used to it. Tomorrow I will probably roast you even harder." Lucian read the words, shook his head with quiet amusement, and for the first time in centuries found himself genuinely looking forward to tomorrow instead of simply expecting it. Days quietly slipped into weeks, and the conversation that had begun by accident slowly became the most predictable part of both of their lives. Every morning started with a simple greeting. Every evening ended with one more message neither of them seemed willing to send first nor willing to stop. They still had not exchanged names. They had never spoken over the phone. They had never shared photographs. Somehow those invisible boundaries made the connection feel strangely honest. Olivia joked that mysterious strangers were less complicated than most people she met in real life. Lucian secretly agreed. One chilly Thursday afternoon, Olivia hurried between her 2 jobs carrying a paper bag with nothing more than an apple, a bottle of water, and a peanut butter sandwich she had packed before sunrise. Her schedule left almost no room for rest, but she refused to complain unless she could also find something to laugh about. As she crossed a small neighborhood park, she noticed an elderly man struggling to gather scattered grocery bags after one of them had tipped over beside a bench. Without hesitating, she set her own lunch aside, knelt on the sidewalk and carefully helped him collect fresh vegetables, bread, and a carton of milk before the traffic light changed. The gentleman thanked her several times and reached for his wallet. Olivia immediately shook her head with a friendly smile. "Please keep your money. Just promise me you will not try carrying every grocery bag in the store next time." The man laughed warmly. "I shall certainly consider that excellent advice." She waved goodbye and hurried toward work, never asking his name and never noticing the elegant black sedan waiting quietly across the street. Inside the vehicle sat Theodore, the longtime royal steward who had spent centuries serving the Ashcroft family. He had watched the entire interaction without saying a single word. Most people showed kindness when someone important was watching. Very few offered it when they believed nobody would ever know. That evening Theodore returned to Ashcroft Tower and requested a private audience. Lucian looked up from another stack of reports as the elderly steward entered with unusual urgency. "Did something happen?" Theodore smiled gently before answering. "Today I met the young woman who has been making your Majesty laugh." Lucian remained perfectly still. Theodore continued. "She has no idea who I am. Yet she stopped everything she was doing to help a stranger without expecting thanks, recognition, or reward. She even refused money she clearly could have used." Silence settled across the study. Outside the enormous windows, the Manhattan skyline shimmered beneath soft rain while distant lights reflected across the river. Theodore finally added, "Sometimes character reveals itself most clearly when nobody important is watching." Lucian lowered his eyes toward the phone resting beside his desk. Almost as if summoned by the thought, it vibrated once. Olivia had written emergency question. He answered immediately. "What happened?" She replied, "If somebody offers you pineapple on pizza, is that friendship or a warning sign?" Lucian smiled before typing back. "I believe that depends entirely on how hungry you are." Her response arrived seconds later. Incorrect answer. The correct answer was definitely a warning sign. He laughed quietly, and Theodore could not hide his own smile. For centuries the palace had searched for ways to ease the weight resting upon its king. Scholars had offered wisdom. Advisors had offered strategy. Nobles had offered loyalty. Yet somehow the greatest change had arrived through a young woman who believed she was simply exchanging jokes with an overworked stranger. As the evening deepened and another conversation unfolded one message at a time, neither of them realized that elsewhere invisible eyes had already begun noticing a pattern. No royal secret could remain forever. Nearly 3 months passed before either of them admitted, even silently to themselves, that the conversation had become something neither wanted to lose. Every night at almost the same time Olivia's phone would light up, and every night Lucian would find himself setting aside reports, council documents, and endless responsibilities to answer within minutes. The distance between them remained exactly the same, yet somehow they had become the closest person in each other's day. One Friday evening Olivia finished her shift at the cafe, just as a gentle spring rain began falling across Manhattan. She pulled up the hood of her light jacket and started walking toward the subway instead of paying for a taxi she could not afford. Halfway there she noticed a small neighborhood bookstore preparing to close. A handwritten sign in the window announced a clearance sale. Curious, she stepped inside and spent nearly 20 minutes browsing shelves filled with worn novels and second-hand biographies before purchasing a paperback for $3. When she finally returned outside, her phone vibrated. "You disappeared tonight." She smiled while standing beneath the bookstore awning. "I was making an irresponsible financial decision." Lucian immediately replied. "Should I be concerned?" She laughed softly. "Probably. I spent $3 on a used book instead of buying dessert." He answered. "That hardly sounds irresponsible." Olivia looked down at the weathered cover resting beneath her arm. "Maybe not. But books have always felt like little vacations I could actually afford." Lucian read the message twice. During 7 centuries he had collected priceless manuscripts from every corner of the world. Yet the simple way she described an inexpensive paperback somehow gave those treasures new meaning. He typed carefully. "What made you choose that one?" She answered without hesitation. "It looked lonely on the shelf. I figured somebody should take it home." Lucian leaned back in his chair, unable to stop smiling. Theodore entered quietly with evening tea and immediately noticed the familiar expression. The king had begun smiling often enough that even palace staff whispered about the remarkable change. Theodore placed the tray beside the desk and said gently, "Your Majesty seems lighter these days." Lucian looked toward the glowing skyline beyond the windows. "Perhaps I finally remembered that ordinary conversations can be extraordinary." Theodore bowed respectfully before leaving him alone again. Across the city Olivia climbed the stairs to her apartment, where Ethan was preparing a simple dinner of tomato soup and grilled cheese sandwiches. He noticed the book immediately. "Another bargain?" Olivia nodded proudly. "Best $3 I have spent all month." Ethan grinned. "Whoever keeps texting you is definitely rubbing off on you. You smile before you even unlock your phone now." Olivia rolled her eyes playfully, but she could not deny it. After dinner she settled beside the window with the old paperback in one hand and her phone in the other. Lucian sent another message. "May I ask something personal?" She answered. "That depends how personal." A few seconds passed before the reply appeared. "What makes you keep trusting a complete stranger?" Olivia looked out at the rain sliding slowly down the glass before answering honestly. "Because you have never tried to impress me. You have never asked me for anything. You simply show up every day. Most people underestimate how rare that is." Lucian stared at the screen as silence filled the room around him. Kingdoms had been built upon loyalty. Alliances had lasted centuries because of promises. Yet no ancient law had ever explained trust as simply as the woman who believed she was talking to an ordinary manager. He slowly typed one final message before midnight. "Thank you for believing the best in someone you have never met." Olivia smiled warmly and replied with complete confidence. "Do not make me regret it." Neither of them realized that elsewhere inside the hidden security offices beneath Ashcroft Tower, an automated monitoring system had quietly completed another routine communication analysis, and for the first time one anonymous phone number had risen to the top of a report that would soon reach the eyes of the Royal Council. The following Monday began like every other Monday, at least for Olivia. The alarm rang before sunrise, the coffee tasted slightly too weak, and the subway arrived exactly 3 minutes late. She smiled anyway because somewhere between brushing her hair and locking the apartment door, her phone had already buzzed with its usual morning message. "Good morning. I hope today is kinder than yesterday," she answered while waiting for the train. "That depends. Did the universe finally cancel meetings?" Lucian read the message while crossing the vast marble corridor leading toward the royal council chamber, hidden beneath Ashcroft Tower. A faint smile touched his face before he replied. "Unfortunately, the universe remains stubborn." Olivia answered almost instantly. "Then I wish you strength and unlimited coffee." His smile lingered even after the screen went dark. It remained there until the massive doors of the council chamber slowly opened. Inside, dozens of senior advisors waited beneath towering stone arches, illuminated by elegant chandeliers, and pale morning light filtering through ancient stained glass. Lord Sebastian stood beside the central table holding a sealed report. Captain Rowan remained nearby with the calm posture of someone carrying difficult news. Lucian immediately sensed the atmosphere had changed. Lord Sebastian bowed respectfully. "Your Majesty, our automated security network completed a routine communications audit overnight." Lucian's expression remained composed. "Continue." Captain Rowan placed the report onto the polished table. "An unidentified civilian phone number has exchanged more than 11,000 messages with your private device over the past 3 months. Every advisor remained silent. No one seemed shocked by the number itself. They were shocked because no unknown person had ever maintained such direct contact with a vampire king in recorded history. Lord Sebastian spoke carefully. "We understand these conversations may be harmless. However, our responsibility requires us to evaluate every unidentified connection involving the throne." Lucian lowered his eyes toward the report without opening it. "She is not a threat." Captain Rowan answered respectfully. "We do not believe she intends harm. Our concern is that others may discover her before we do. If hostile forces learn someone has unrestricted personal access to your Majesty, they may attempt to exploit that connection." The chamber fell silent once more. Lucian finally looked around the room. "She has never asked for money. She has never asked for influence. She does not know my name, my position, or my world. She believes she is speaking with an exhausted manager who complains about meetings too often." A few quiet smiles appeared before quickly disappearing. Lord Sebastian folded his hands. "That may be exactly why she deserves our protection." Across Manhattan, Olivia knew nothing about ancient councils or hidden kingdoms. She spent the afternoon helping frustrated customers recover online accounts before rushing to the cafe for her evening shift. During a brief break, she noticed a young mother struggling to carry a stroller through the front door while balancing 2 paper shopping bags. Olivia immediately hurried over, held the door open, and carried one of the bags inside before returning to work without expecting thanks. One of her co-workers watched the interaction and laughed softly. "You really cannot help yourself, can you?" Olivia shrugged with an easy smile. "Everybody has rough days. Sometimes people only need one person to make today a little easier than yesterday." At almost the exact same moment, Theodore quietly repeated those words inside the palace after hearing Lord Sebastian summarize Olivia's actions from the security review. The elderly steward looked toward Lucian with calm certainty. "Your Majesty, kindness leaves patterns just as clearly as danger does. The difference is that most people forget to look for them." Lucian glanced once more at the unopened report resting before him. Then his phone vibrated gently beneath the table. One new message appeared. "Survived another Monday. Barely." He looked at the familiar words, and for the first time since entering the chamber, the weight of the entire kingdom seemed just a little lighter, even as every person around him realized the quiet conversation that had restored their king's smile could no longer remain a secret for much longer. The next evening the rain returned, drumming softly against the towering windows of Ashcroft Tower, while another emergency council session gathered beneath ancient stone arches hidden far below the city. Lucian entered the chamber with his usual calm expression, yet every advisor in the room sensed something had changed. The unopened communication report still rested in the center of the long marble table. Lord Sebastian broke the silence first. "Your Majesty, we respectfully request permission to identify the civilian involved." Lucian remained standing instead of taking his seat. "No." Captain Rowan spoke carefully. "Then at least allow us to ensure her safety from a distance. We have no intention of interfering with her life. We simply cannot ignore a situation that could expose both her and the throne." Lucian looked around the chamber before answering. "She has lived an ordinary life without our protection for 24 years. She deserves to continue living that life without discovering an army of strangers watching her every move." Lady Genevieve folded her hands. "Your Majesty, this is no longer only about trust. It is about responsibility. If another supernatural faction discovers this connection before we do, they may interpret her importance differently." Lucian's silver eyes narrowed ever so slightly. "Then our responsibility is to protect her privacy before anything else." Silence settled across the chamber. No one challenged him further because they recognized something unusual beneath his calm voice. The king was not defending a political decision. He was protecting the dignity of someone who did not even know she needed protection. Miles away, Olivia knew nothing about hidden councils or ancient kingdoms. She had just finished helping close the cafe when one of her co-workers accidentally dropped an entire box of clean coffee mugs. Thankfully, none of them broke, but everyone laughed with relief. Olivia stayed an extra 20 minutes helping organize supplies before finally stepping outside into the cool evening air. She pulled her phone from her pocket and smiled as soon as she saw the familiar notification. "Long day?" Lucian had asked. She answered while walking toward the subway station beneath glowing streetlights. "Busy day. Nobody yelled at me today, so I am calling that a personal victory." His reply came almost immediately. "Congratulations. I believe that deserves a celebration." Olivia laughed softly. "My version of celebrating is buying fancy yogurt instead of the cheapest one." Lucian looked at the message with genuine curiosity. Is there really such a difference? She stopped beneath the awning of a small grocery store and answered, "Absolutely. Some victories are measured in dollars. Others are measured in blueberry flavor." He smiled, realizing once again that she had a remarkable way of making ordinary moments feel important. After buying her favorite yogurt, Olivia continued home through the gentle rain. Halfway there, she noticed fresh flowers resting beside a neighborhood memorial dedicated to a beloved crossing guard who had recently retired after decades of helping children cross the street safely. Without thinking twice, she spent the last few dollars in her wallet on a single white flower from a nearby stand and quietly placed it with the others before walking away. She never noticed the discreet security camera mounted across the intersection. Deep beneath Ashcroft Tower, Captain Rowan reviewed the city's routine surveillance network, while attempting to verify only Olivia's location without invading her personal life. One brief image appeared on the screen. It showed the young woman leaving a flower for someone she had never even met personally. Rowan quietly closed the file and looked toward Lord Sebastian. "There is nothing suspicious about her," he admitted. Lord Sebastian answered with a thoughtful smile. "No, there is something exceptionally ordinary about her. Perhaps that is exactly why His Majesty values those conversations so deeply." At that same moment, Lucian received one final message before midnight. "Good night, mysterious manager. Try not to survive tomorrow entirely on meetings and coffee." He looked out across the rain-covered skyline before replying with quiet sincerity. "Good night. Thank you for making an ordinary day unforgettable." Neither of them realized that the distance separating their two worlds had never been smaller, and that the next choice either of them made would begin changing everything they believed about fate. The following Saturday arrived wrapped in gentle sunshine instead of rain, and for the first time in weeks Olivia finished both jobs before late evening. She carried a small paper bag containing fresh bread, fruit, and the blueberry yogurt she had promised herself after surviving another difficult week. As she walked through the neighborhood park, her phone vibrated with the familiar message she had quietly begun expecting every day. "I have a question." She smiled before replying. "Those usually get me into trouble, but go ahead." Several seconds passed before his answer appeared. "If two strangers have spoken every day for 3 months, are they still strangers?" Olivia slowed her steps beneath a row of blooming trees and considered the question more carefully than she expected. Around her, children laughed on a nearby playground while an elderly couple shared coffee on a park bench. Ordinary life unfolded exactly as it always had, yet the question felt strangely important. Finally she typed, I think strangers become familiar long before they become friends. Friendship happens when people choose to stay. Lucian read the message while standing alone inside the quiet palace observatory overlooking the endless New York skyline. The city shimmered beneath the afternoon light, filled with millions of people who would never know an immortal king watched over them every day. He read her words again before answering honestly, then thank you for choosing to stay. Olivia looked at the screen and felt an unfamiliar warmth spread through her chest. She answered with the same gentle humor that had carried every conversation between them. Do not get sentimental on me, mysterious manager. I still plan to make fun of your meetings next week. A quiet laugh escaped Lucian before he looked toward Theodore, who had quietly entered the observatory carrying fresh tea. The elderly steward noticed the expression immediately. There was peace in the king's face that had not existed for centuries. Theodore spoke softly. Some people spend an entire lifetime searching for someone who speaks to them without fear. Lucian looked back toward the city below. She has never treated me like anything other than another tired person trying to get through the day. Theodore nodded. Perhaps that is why she reminds you that you are more than a crown. Hours later, after finishing dinner with Ethan, Olivia settled beside the apartment window while the evening light slowly appeared across the skyline. She looked at her phone for several minutes before finally sending the first message of the night. My turn to ask something. Lucian replied almost instantly. I am listening. She smiled. If we ever actually met, would I be disappointed? The question lingered on his screen longer than any message before it. He knew the truthful answer carried risks she could never imagine. At last he wrote, I hope not. Olivia answered. Good. Because I think we have earned 1 cup of coffee after 3 months of surviving each other. Lucian closed his eyes briefly before opening them again. Every ancient instinct urged caution. Every responsibility warned him to keep the distance between their worlds intact. Yet another part of him, quieter and far older than fear, reminded him that the greatest moments in history often began with a single act of trust. He typed carefully. Then let us choose a small neighborhood coffee shop. Nothing expensive. Nothing impressive. Just coffee. Olivia laughed softly. Perfect. Fancy places make me nervous anyway. He smiled before sending one final message. Then ordinary coffee it is. Neither of them realized that the decision had already been made long before either message appeared. It had begun on a rainy night with one mistaken text, grown stronger through thousands of ordinary conversations, and now quietly led 2 completely different lives toward the same table, where truth, trust, and destiny would finally meet face to face.